You know when fans use that logic, which, by the way, spoiler, will never ever work, which goes like this: I'm pretty sure as a top pro he knows X, Y, and Z. Like, by the way, those pretty sure statements almost always wrong, because, like, first of all, what they assume immediately is that to be a pro, I always describe it like this, is like a linear progression, and that by getting to the top level, that pro is, for example, better, even in knowledge, at everything than me and Lurpus do, because he's above us. No, he's obviously just way better at clicking mouse one, isn't he? Like, he's got better aim. Like, I'm sure people can understand this premise, that they think players are smart who aren't the best fraggers. Therefore, they understand that pros have differing skill levels. But basically, where I was going to go to is this. Dude, you wouldn't believe, every time I say it on shows, people think I'm, like, exaggerating. When I tell them the majority, I'm talking massive, make it capital letters, fucking majority, we're probably talking like 80-90% of them, top pros don't give a fuck about individual demo research. They're not doing this, which, listen, to me, I always thought it was crazy even back in your day, mate, because even back then, if I'm like Forrest or something, and I even just put in an hour a week, the dividends that could pay are so crazy. But the idea they don't do it in, this is why I know they'll never do it unless they're forced to, purposes. If they don't do it in the modern day when they really do make 30k a month and they can literally win $1 million, like, they're never going to do it, mate. You could pay these guys 100 million. And if anything, they'll use the same stupid logic that I'm sure they use now, which I'll just reference. There was an old Immortals team that was a bit like this, where their logic was like, well, how do you do any more work? We've already made it. And it's like, I get where you're coming from that perspective. You're like, listen, I've already making loads of money. But my point is this. If anything, fans, the fact that they're making all this money and they're successful, but they haven't done it yet, means they'll never do it. Because I've always thought that is nuts to me, mate. Like, I know I'm not asking people to go crazy and go like, you know, Kobe Bryant or Peyton Manning levels where you just obsess your whole life about this. Well, I get it. Not everyone's built that way. But you don't even have to do that. Like, in the modern day, NFL people all know this. You can just get a guy to send you basic breakdowns. Like, look, here's 5 routes that this guy runs. Here's 4 that you're going to run. Like, here's what to look for when you, like, we're talking simple shit. Like, it's almost Sesame Street levels. They don't make it complicated. But the dividends that'll pay are crazy. And so even though I'm just screaming into the void now, it does still blow my mind that it's so hard to get players on board with this as a principle. It's like they get the idea of watching the demo with the coach, which, by the way, they already get because we made them do it. Then they sort of get that the IGL should watch the demos because he's going to call the strats. But they still don't get somehow. This is why I want to ask you about this. What somehow they still don't get is they don't get how they individually would also benefit in the same way, but a micro version of how the IGL in a macro sense benefits from watching the demo of the whole opposing team. How can they never get that angle? Because I just think to myself, like, I'm excluding geniuses like Simple and Nico. Like, maybe they don't need to do it. They are so unbelievably good and they know their own game. But if I was like a mid-table player, bro, there's millions of dollars waiting for you to be picked up if you just do this right now. Like, if you play for like Godsent or something, bro, just pause the video right now, write down a post-it note and start doing this, because no joke, you could literally like double your value in this world.
Let's get one of these. Yeah, I mean, look, I think that the way that many people kind of justify not doing it, and I've heard this a million times, is either nobody else is doing it either. So like, you know, like I will burp on like even fair ground, ground. And the other thing is that like, well, you know, like sometimes I've done it and then like I've done the wrong thing because I reacted the wrong way. So like I'm better off just focusing on my game. That's a classic cliche. I will say, just based on the experience. So for example, if we think about the EG team that I was on, so me and Good for Nothing used to watch a bunch of demos and like try to prepare for things, but we noticed that the times that we made everybody watch the demos and like kind of like talked about it ahead of time, people were just confused and like would completely sometimes like alter the way they played, like to like a ridiculous extreme where it's like, oh, like they like to do this on these rounds, so like I just waited for this one thing for the entire half and it never happened. It's
right.
That's not how you're supposed to, you know, like when you think about what they might be doing, like maybe if you know that they're more likely, you change your play style by like expecting the probability of that happening by 5 percentage points instead of it all being flat. Like that's how you should think about it. It's a probability distribution. So like for example, in that team, what we used to do is we would gather all the information ourselves and we would try to like sprinkle it at like opportunistic times in the game, and we found that like that actually worked better. I do think that there's some people who are just like very smart, some players specifically. You know, for example, the names that you mentioned, I'm sure there's many others where like they kind of just instinctively pick up a lot of this stuff. So
yes.
Yeah, like I've had teammates where they're just like confused about like reads, where, you know, like we're playing a game and you say like, well, like we like we practiced against these guys, like 2 months ago, and they did this and this, and then like this happened, and like I think they're gonna do this, and they're like, what? It's like speaking French to me now, and like they just like can't imagine, because I think like many people just don't pay attention like naturally, and then there's other people who kind of pick up on a lot of it. My guess is that many of the like all-time greats, generally speaking, are very smart about all of this, even if they don't really talk about it. It's like I think we maybe even made this point in a previous episode. It's like the stuff where like LeBron talks about like the sequences of the game. Like, of course, like like I think every smart Counter-Strike player will be able to tell you all that stuff, like what happened.
The obvious example
that, like
by the
what
way,
drove those decisions.
I don't know if you remember this, but I know a classic example is that people have seen on broadcasts is that Get Right is very much like that. Now, I'll tell you again, he's not watching every demo. He's just remembering from games he saw. It's like what you're saying. Basically, he just has a great eye for detail. I'm assuming from playing, and his brain sort of doing like an analog version of what we're talking about. Like, instead of actually like taking notes and studying it with a stat statement, he's just doing like an analog version of that, I'm guessing, as he watches anything.
Yeah. And I think there's, for a bunch of people that works, and then there's many others for whom it doesn't work. It's sort of the difference between, like some people do better if they skip class the entire term and then, go through the slides the day before the exam. And I think some people, like, they just can't pick up anything doing that. Some people do better with road memorization than others. And, I think people just kind of have to figure out what works for them, what doesn't, and then try to work around that to get to the point they need to go.